everybody. Welcome back to another one of these things that we eventually will name. But we are talking about PearDeck. We're taking a tour through PearDeck. And today's topic, this topic that we're going to talk about is the student-paced activity versus the instructor-paced activity, really just to discuss, reasons why you would want to do those activities. And so when you go through PearDeck, you'll be prompted with a screen that looks like this, minus the verses and the pair there, but where you're going to present, and you can choose whether it's going to be the student-paced mode or the instructor-paced mode. So a student-paced is that's exactly it. The students are going to determine the pace of their learning as they go through the activity, whereas instructor pace is like what Owen showed us in his video previously, where as he clicked through the presentation, it changed everyone else's screens and he had control of the pace of the lesson. So just a quick overview of some things when it comes to both student and instructor-led activities. The student-paced activities, some ideas of how you could use that for remote learning, obviously flipping your lessons, differentiating your learning, getting specific groups of kids, the specific, more personalized learning opportunities. You could create and use quizzes or homework, anything that is done with kids missing class, even though we're all online, and Canvas is going to do a lot of that as well. And then as a substitute. From the perspective of the instructor-led pace activity, again, you can control the pace of the lesson. So you might have 4 slides where if it was student paced, the kids are going to fly through it really quick. But if you want to have deeper discussion, Owen had given us the example in his video about how there might be a response, and now we're going to get into the metacognition of it and say, well, why did you choose that response? Take us through your thinking of that answer. We mentioned before, highlighting or hiding responses, locking the screens of the students, giving just kind of more of that classroom control, and then creating new prompts in the pop-up activity. So if you find that there's a question that you want to add to your presentation, but it's not there, then you can pop it up and see how it's done. I wanted to, before we just discuss this as a group, I did want to show you an example here in Canvas, because let me set this up from the beginning here. If I create a new assignment and I want to go to do PearDeck, you have a couple ways that this can happen. One way is that you can use the PearDeck external tool. So when you go to submission type and you do external tool, and you're going to go and you're going to find PearDeck in the tools that are offered, and you would give your instructions and set your points and things like that. And typically this might be something that's more formative, so you're not necessarily going to do a grade for it. And using the external tool is not going to give you the same access to SpeedGrader, right, Trista and Owen? I'm getting nods. Yes, if you don't see them. Okay, thank you. So if it's purely just like interaction engagement, but you're not worrying for grades, you can use that external tool, or you can just drop the link in and then be able to create an assignment that way. So if I save this, then now I can come back in and it'll prompt me to select a file from my drive. And eventually what it'll do is it'll look like this, where the teacher dashboard is gonna come up in so I can see what's going on. So you can see this was a student-paced activity. You can see the answers that were given along the way. And so you can wonder, I said, what was the question? What's the teacher-led versus student-paced? Teachers like to have the instructor-led versus the student-paced is kind of stressful, because that's a little less control on the teacher side. So it's very simple to put into Canvas as you're looking to use it either way, which is nice. And it's a way that you can really harness PearDeck and connect it well into Canvas. So, there's not a lot to show, because PearDeck, all the things that we've already talked about in developing and building PearDecks, whether you're doing student-paced or instructor-paced, they're already there. And so really it comes down to like, well, what scenarios would you do student-paced? And I'm going to open it up for us as a group. Like we were all in the classroom for a significant amount of time. And what would be your cup of tea when it comes to this? Where would you use student-paced activities versus instructor-paced activities in your teaching? What would that look like for you guys?
Well, I can speak just real quick. When I went to the regional training for this, I can't remember when it was last year, the way that they use it, I think that's when student pace first kind of came in, is that the instructor, obviously we were learning things about PearDeck, she would, give a presentation on something. So as a teacher, it could be a mini lesson, right? Or something that is teacher led. And then we would go to the presentation and she would basically say, okay, you're starting at the beginning, you're going to go until you see the big stop sign. So it would be an ongoing thing. So obviously there's no way to stop the kids from going forward or whatever, but you give a time limit and you're like, okay, you're going to do these 5 slides. And we even were able to work collaboratively if we wanted to. So we could sit with a group of people and work together. We could work by ourselves, go through those slides. And then once we got to the stopping point, then we just waited, for the teacher to go on. And obviously it wasn't an open-ended amount of time. It's like, here, 15 minutes, go do these 3 slides. And then she'd bring us back together. We'd discuss the options. She'd pull up the responses and we'd talk about them. And then she'd go on with something else. And then we'd go do the rest of the PearDeck. So I'd never seen it used that way. So I thought that was an interesting student-paced, but teacher-led at the same time.
Yeah, and just also, I think we've all struggled as a teacher in this world, this new sort of COVID world, with taking some things that we feel confident with in the classroom and porting those activities to an online environment because it has a different set of challenges, right? So whereas with teacher-paced, I'm still the information holder and I'm bestowing it to kids, you kind of have to almost turn that over to you have to set it up so that Canvas can dole out the information at the kids' pace at different times, at different rates, so on and so forth. So it presents some design issues as well, but it does enable you to still get the job done in terms of still being able to teach that content and not having to reinvent it, which I mentioned last time as well. I think that's a really great feature within this tool as we're getting down deep in the weeds with it.
I think about the opportunities, like it was a while ago when I taught math, but how using PearDeck, I could take it into the homework and have it be like a confirmation of their understanding, right? I could assign 5 problems and they can do it the traditional way, laying out the numbers, but then the PearDeck says, well, draw a picture of number 1, how you solve number 1, or write it out. I can have multiple ways to extend their abilities in a self-paced sort of model that's an extension for all to be able to participate in, but yet with some new different types of things that I might not be grading. I just want to see that they can do it, that they're participating in it as a formative way to see, like, I know that Trista can write the math, but can she conceptualize it enough to put it into a drawing? Or is that where we need to move in the next process? So that's one way that's kind of stuck out to me, is just being able to create extensions without having to get all arts and craft. I'm not very artistic when it comes to like crafting. And so doing this stuff and having these tools this way allows for that to be able to be brought into my classroom.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, is that PearDeck is not an assessment tool, like a summative assessment tool. It's a formative assessment tool. So it's not something that a teacher would want to spend time, grading and worrying about, did they get the first one right, the second one right? It's very open-ended, and it's the ability for the teacher to kind of, like, as Owen said, have that pulse check of how are my kids doing and do they understand, and are they able to express that, and not just like, did they get the answer correct, right? It's about maybe they got it wrong, but giving them the opportunity to express or defend why they picked that wrong answer, because maybe they have a reason and a valid reason that they chose B instead of A. And that they're still maybe wrong in terms of, what you're teaching them, but you have a better understanding of where they're thinking and why they chose that answer. So it opens it up to conversations as well, I think.
And what you guys are saying reminded me of something that a mentor once told me, because I remember the first 6 weeks that I taught, I had like 165 grades in the grade book, and everyone's like, "How's it going, Owen?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm so exhausted. I graded all this stuff." And they're like, "Don't do that. Don't have 165 grades." And so my mentor told me something that sticks with me to this day, and I still tell teachers. Teacher observation is a perfectly acceptable means of evaluation. And that's what we're talking about here too. Not everything has to have a grade, right? You just want to sort of check in on their pulse, see how they're doing. Are there any pain points? Are they getting it well?
Well, there is an element too in there when you do student paced on the teacher dashboard where you can see the progress of where your students are at. So if you had, like what Trista was explaining, you presented a mini lesson and then you turned on student paced for the next 10 slides that were practice and application, and you watch on your device and you see 50% of my kids are not getting past slide 2. And so we're going to have to come back to this. We got to come back. We got to connect, or I need to pull that group out. I can pull them into a small group, say, "Hey, y'all come over here. Let's work on this together for a little bit." And then by the time that student pace time is done, hopefully everybody has been caught up and brought into the same place.
And the cool thing about that is that if you do have kids working remotely and in your classroom, you can still do that same thing. Aside from pulling them small group, you could still have a conversation with them via either feedback, on PearDeck or in whatever other back channel means you have with that student. So it doesn't leave that remote kid or kid that's homesick just, not understanding and feeling alienated from the rest of the class, as long as the teacher is, engaged in what's going on.
And I just want to say, guys, I'm reminded of the concept that everything is everything, right? Everything that we've talked about either links to the previous one, which we talked about engagement, or a future one where we're talking about feedback. So it's all important, right?
We could talk for hours.
We could, but we're not going to do that to you because we know that you have lots of other things to do. So student paced, instructor-led, both very good options when it comes to PearDeck. Of course, if you need help with this and bringing this into your classroom, don't hesitate to reach out to any of the DLS team, secondary DLS team. We also have some pretty awesome PearDeck experts on the elementary team as well. So if you have a question that stumps us, we have the big guns that we can go to. So thank you all for checking this video out. And of course, reach out. We'll be checking in on you as this next week comes. And best of luck. We'll talk to you soon.